Hey, everybody. Hope you're having a great week. We are going into week 10 of football, and we've got your weekly fantasy stardom and sit 'em segment for the week. We're going to go into a couple players that, I think have favorable matchups this week, and then some that I think have less than favorable matchups. So let's go ahead and get started.
Oh yeah.
Okay. So for the first player that I like, obviously last week Tony Pollard ended up going off with a 131-yard, three-touchdown effort. Where obviously Zeke didn't play in the last game. Zeke is questionable to play against the Packers this weekend. But even if he does play, it's not expected that he's going to get the majority of the work. Obviously, Pollard is expected to be the primary ball carrier in that game because the Cowboys are saying that they're trying to be conservative with Zeke. Zeke has come out and said that he plans to play deep into the playoffs, which we'll see if that ends up happening or not. If the Cowboys, obviously they'd have to get deep into the playoffs first, but yeah. So I do like the matchup Tony Pollard against the Packers this weekend. If you have Tony Pollard on your roster, start him. We've also
Yeah, I just
got
had to.
Jamal
I had
Williams.
to go. I had to go check and see if Tony Pollard might be available because I could use another good running back, but of course he's not.
Yeah, I mean, I know somebody's probably got him, but I think the top now that Raheem, you got Jeff Wilson. I'm trying to think of like who else would even be
Oh no, I don't
top.
think I didn't get Jeff Wilson. I don't think I
Oh
didn't
no,
go.
somebody else put in. That's right. I think Gunner
Oh,
got
someone else
Jeff
got him.
Wilson.
Hmm.
Yeah, put in a claim for him.
I
But
figured somebody
we'll
would. I mean, he's
yeah,
decent, but yeah, there's really nobody good left, so it's back to that.
ugh, yeah, ugh. I like Jamal Williams against the Chicago Bears. The Bears have allowed opposing running backs to score at least 12 fantasy points per game in 8 games in a row, including 7 of those games with at least 16 points per game allowed. And also, they're slowly working DeAndre Swift back into the lineup. He hasn't gotten a lot of work the last 2 weeks. Jamal Williams, obviously, 24 carries, 81 yards last week in the win against the Packers. So I look for Jamal Williams to get plenty of work this week against the Bears. Obviously, the Lions, they do like to run the football, and they're going to be looking for their second straight win. Obviously, their game plan is to probably have Jared Goff do as little as possible and kind of stay within that game manager role. We also have Josh Jacobs against the Colts. Obviously, we've talked about what a shit show the Colts are. Obviously, making a lot of moves with the head coach in particular. Jeff Saturday, a guy that's got 3 years of high school coaching experience, going into his first NFL game this Sunday. And Josh Jacobs has been going off. I mean, he didn't have a great game last week against the Jaguars, but the Jaguars have an underrated defense. I mean, they're actually a better defense than a lot of people give them credit for. And the Colts defense has allowed at least 16.8 fantasy points to opposing running backs in 3 straight games, including giving up 20.7 to AG Antonio Gibson back in Week 8. So, I mean, he's got a favorable matchup against the Colts team that's kind of in shambles right now. So if you've got Josh Jacobs, go ahead and pull the trigger on him in this favorable matchup.
Yeah, really anybody if they're facing the Colts, I mean, it's usually
Yeah,
probably going to work out well.
yeah. Some quarterbacks. So I did some research on this after we talked about this earlier because and I've got both of these guys on the list here, but because I was like, well, how's Tom going to do against Seattle? So I looked into how Tom's played, and obviously Tom Brady plays the Seattle Seahawks in Munich, Germany, this Sunday morning, and Tom hasn't been a great fantasy quarterback this year. I've known firsthand. He's scored over 19 fantasy points only twice. But here's what I like. Now, Tom has played 3 international games in his career. He's undefeated internationally, 3-0. And in those 3 fantasy games, Tom Brady has scored at least 26 fantasy points in all 3 of those outings.
Yeah, but these
And
are all times that he was probably with the Patriots, I would assume, right? Back in the
um
past. Because I mean, that's Tom Brady then versus
not
Tom Brady now, and the way the Bucks are playing currently. So I don't know if that would necessarily help with whether to start him or not. I mean, it's encouraging. Like you think maybe he'll win again because it's international again, but
Yeah. Well, and then on the other side of that, I mean, I'll make the argument on the other side if you don't feel good about that. So the Seahawks defense, which is obviously the other side of the coin on that, they've allowed their past three opposing quarterbacks to score at least 22 fantasy points against them. And I mean, obviously they're playing the GOAT, greatest of all time. So I mean, if they gave up 22 fantasy points to Kyler Murray last week, then I mean, their defense hasn't been great. They've been winning games because they've been limiting the turnovers and running the ball well, and Geno's playing good football. But I mean, they gave up 21 points to Arizona last week, and I mean, Arizona is kind of a struggling team in their own right. So, and that game was close at a lot of points. I mean, it was within one score for a lot of the game until Seattle finally pulled ahead and went up 2 scores late in the game. So, I personally like it. I mean, I could end up being dead wrong. Sometimes that's the price you pay. But I think Tom's going to have a pretty good game against the Seahawks and go to 4-0 in Munich, Germany. And
so
even if he doesn't
that.
win, I mean he's at least going to have a good game. I think he's going to throw at least 3 touchdowns, which would be the most he's thrown in any game so far this year. And
I hope so. I mean,
yeah, I mean I think that he's kind of started to put that emotional shit behind him. I mean, I think that he's starting to hopefully clear his head, and hopefully we start to see the Tom Brady we're used to. And maybe they'll
see.
make a run.
Now he's
I hope they don't make too
divorce.
good of a run, but you know, I if this is going to be his last season, which I've told you I don't think it's going to be now that he's getting the divorce, and now Tom can come out and play whenever he wants, and he doesn't have to worry about the obligation of like having his wife like nagging him to go do shit. He's like, I'm going to play till I'm 50.
If he does play till he's 50, that'd be amazing.
Yeah, that'd be crazy. No, that'll never get. Dude, he'll have 150,000 passing yards by that point. Well, maybe like
I don't know about
125.
that,
Probably like 125. Maybe like 120, more realistically.
Yeah.
I also like the Justin Fields matchup. Justin's been trending upwards the last 3 weeks in a row. Like we've talked about, he's gotten increasingly more fantasy points each of the last 3 weeks. Quarterback rating over 100 in the last 3 games as well. And last week, Fields led all quarterbacks with 47 fantasy points. Obviously, 178 of that coming on the ground and 1 touchdown. Also threw for 123 and 3 touchdowns. So Justin Fields, obviously, this week going against the Detroit Lions, who are ranked 32nd in the NFL in defense. You know, they did have a pretty good game last week, holding Aaron to 9 points, so maybe they're starting to turn the corner, but I certainly like the matchup for Justin, and I think he's going to have a good game.
Not the Aaron that we're used to seeing, though. I mean, beating the Packers this year isn't quite the same as beating them in years past.
Yeah, exactly. Aaron doesn't have Devontae Adams anymore, and obviously they're about 50-50 in games on when they're able to run the ball or not. I mean, some games they absolutely struggle to run the ball, and then some games they go off for like 200. So it's hard to say. Some guys that I don't like in the matchups here this weekend. Matt Stafford continues to be abysmal. After throwing for, I think it was 41 touchdown passes last season, he's on pace right now to throw for, I believe, 18 by the end of the season, if he stays at this pace. Obviously, getting held under 200 yards and 1 touchdown against the Niners in the last game. They played the Niners the week before. He also got held under 200 yards into 1 touchdown against the Niners. He also got held under 200 yards into 1 touchdown against the Bucs this past weekend. So 2 straight games where he hasn't been producing very well at all, fantasy-wise. Definitely been a disappointment, I'm sure, as a lot of, you know, because I know he was probably drafted pretty high, I would imagine.
Yeah, he's probably the quarterbacks that went to the lower picks, like when the people started taking quarterbacks. He was probably
like once your Mahomes and like
seventh,
Herbert's and Josh Allen's came off the board, I'm sure people were grabbing Matty Stafford pretty quick. But yeah, man, I mean he's been struggling, and I mean they can't run the ball, and when you're a struggling quarterback and your team can't run the ball, that really doesn't help you at all. I mean, that kind of just compounds your struggles. Also, Andy Dalton. Andy's been having like a good game and a bad game, so he's kind of up and down as a fantasy starter. Obviously, if you need to stream a guy in, Andy might be a guy that you're looking at this season or this weekend. But here's why I don't like the matchup. Normally, the Pittsburgh defense this year would be a favorable matchup, at least in the last several games, because they've been without TJ Watt. But TJ Watt is expected to return this weekend. And obviously, in games where they have him, their record is significantly better, and he's a game wrecker. So even if he's not fully at 100%, I expect Andy to kind of struggle. Obviously, when the Ravens started blitzing Andy, he had a pretty rough game. He took 4 sacks last weekend. So I don't think Andy Dalton's going to have a great game. If you've got Andy Dalton, or if you're looking at quarterbacks to pick up for this weekend, I would avoid Andy Dalton in that matchup. And I also don't like Justin Herbert against the 49ers. Obviously, biased aside, I think that Herbert's playing without his top 2 wideouts. No Keenan Allen, no Mike Williams, who's going to miss a few more weeks. So literally, he's playing with Joshua Palmer, DeAndre Carter, who you know, former Washington Redskin, Washington Commander, Washington football team player. And I think he was on all of them because he stuck around for. I think he, well, maybe not. Maybe he wasn't around long enough to be an official Redskin, but I know he was at least on the football team. But yeah, so they've got Palmer, they've got Carter, and then they've got Michael Bandy. So and if you haven't heard of Michael Bandy, I'm not surprised. So that's their top 3 receivers going against the Niners. Even though we don't have Emmanuel Mosley, and as we'll talk about later, Jason Verrett, who, you know, get well soon, Jason. Worst luck ever for that poor man. We do still have Charvarius Ward, who's one of the top-ranked corners in the league, and Diamador's been stepping up pretty well for us as well. So, I think we'll be all right. Justin Herbert, he's I think he's going to struggle. I mean, I see him probably getting sacked, you know, probably at least 3 times, and probably throwing a pick or 2. In this matchup. And I think Justin Herbert's a good quarterback. I just think that he's seriously depleted. I mean, he does have Eckler, who is always a threat in both the receiving and passing game. Or I'm sorry, in both the receiving and running game. But I don't know if that's going to be enough to beat the Niners defense, who's, you know, really damn good.
Yeah, I'd say it's more of a matter of what your backup quarterback looks like. I mean, because Justin Herbert is a good quarterback. So, hence he's on the bench. Yeah,
that's true. That is true. If you've got a better matchup. But I mean, I could see this being a game where Justin Herbert gets like 8 or 9 points, fantasy-wise. So, yeah. Darrell Henderson against Arizona, the Rams running back. As it's no secret, the Rams have been struggling to run the ball all season long. In a lot of games, they've just outright abandoned the run. So if you've got Darrell Henderson, I don't look for him to have a favorable matchup against Arizona. Obviously, both of those teams are struggling. So it'll be interesting to see who ends up picking up the win. But yeah, I don't like the Darrell Henderson matchup. I also don't like Devin Singletary against the Vikings. The Vikings have a pretty decent, underrated run defense, as you saw last weekend. I mean, you guys got them for a couple long runs, but for the most part, they held your backs in check.
Yeah.
But yeah, Devin Singletary, a lot of times he's the main back in Buffalo. But even then, I mean, they just traded for Nyheim Hines, so you imagine you're going to see more of him. And 9 times out of 10, Josh Allen's the leading rusher in Buffalo anyway. So he doesn't really have a lot of value as a running back, I don't think. And then this guy's got like almost no value at this point. Clyde Edwards-Helaire. You know, he ran for 5 yards last week. Killed me on a bet where I needed him to get only 25 yards. And I know that Andy Reid's kind of gone more to Pacheco, but Pacheco didn't do shit
fuck
either.
Pacheco, god damn it. I mean, I'm so mad about that because I got Edwards-Helaire on my bench, and that's where he's staying. You know, I got Raheem starting over him because he's not doing shit.
I mean, unless Pacheco gets injured, I don't look for that to change. I mean, the Chiefs literally ran the ball like 13 times, threw the ball 68 times. They abandoned the run in a game where they were only down like 1 score the entire time. It's not like you had to abandon the run. This isn't like the Cincinnati Bengals, Carolina Panthers game where you were down 35 at the half. They were within 1 score, so really didn't make a lot of sense to me. But Clyde Edwards-Helaire, Not only is he not playing a lot, but when he is out there, he's not been doing much. So he's almost droppable at this point, unless you're in a league like ours where there's really not much left at running back. I mean, then you might hold on to him, but I mean, in a pinch, I mean, I'd say he's totally droppable.
I agree, unfortunately.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean that's gonna do it for this. Well, okay, I'll throw in one receiver. This guy's been having an awful season, but I like Chris Godwin for the Bucks this weekend. Chris Godwin has yet to catch a touchdown pass all year. I think he's going to have his coming out party this week in Munich against the Seahawks. So if you've been riding on the Chris Godwin train and you're not sure whether to start him, I think he's going to have his best game this Sunday. So I'll leave you guys with that. Good luck to you all in Week 10 fantasy football, and join us here next week.